Welcome to the CBIA BizCast powered by Google. I'm Amanda Marlow. On this episode, we're sitting down with CBIA Foundation Director Dustin Nord for an update on Connecticut's economic snapshot. But before that conversation, we want to begin this episode with some of the top stories you may have missed. Artificial intelligence is becoming a more important tool for small businesses. A new survey from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation shows half of small business workers use AI to complete job-related tasks. The survey found businesses are relying on AI to increase productivity rather than replace employees. The survey, however, did identify a notable gap in AI adoption based on company size, with the smallest businesses less likely to use the technology. U.S. Small Business Administration Connecticut District Director Catherine Marks is leaving the agency after almost 6 years of service. As director, Marks led Connecticut's small business programs and partnerships. She also played a key role in helping businesses navigate federal relief programs during the COVID-19 pandemic. CBIA President and CEO Chris DiPentima called Marks a true champion for small business. The 2026 Travelers Championship produced plenty of drama on the course in Cromwell, with Victor Hovland outlasting world number one Scottie Scheffler in a Monday playoff to win the title. The tournament also made history off the course, generating a record $5 million for more than 270 charities. The Travelers Championship donates 100% of its net proceeds to nonprofit organizations. This year's primary beneficiary is the Ashford-based Hole in the Wall Gang Camp. You can stay on top of all the state's business headlines and much more at CBIA.com. Let's turn now to some new data that's shedding new light on Connecticut's economy and labor force. We're joined once again by CBIA Foundation Director Dustin Nord to help us break down these numbers and tell us a little bit about what this means, where Connecticut's economy is. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So right now, in May, we have about 87,000 job openings in Connecticut. In the last year, nearly 38,000 people have left the workforce. A little bit of a mismatch in the numbers here. What does that tell you about the state's economy?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for the state's economy for sure. I think what it says is that, especially over the last year, we've talked about it previously here and in other places, that Connecticut's heavily relying on immigration for growing our labor force. We tend to lose people to other states, and we haven't seen that immigration over the last year because it changes federal policy, different sort of macro indicators that are making that more challenging. And so ultimately, we just don't have people to fill in for our aging workforce. And it's a problem because, as you said, there's 87,000 job postings right now that, across industries, that there's fewer people to fill those jobs. And that's definitely a problem for the workers, because it means that they're, not necessarily getting the skills or not being directed into the industries where there's opportunity, and obviously for the employers as well, who then can't fill those roles.
And that's kind of one of the roles that the foundation has been really focused on, especially with the workforce report. Now the state has the Pathways Commission to try and help people get the skills to fill those jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the research was to look at where those gaps are, where the mismatches are, and hopefully just shine a light on the opportunities that might be available specifically for high schoolers. But I think broadly speaking, even outside of the Pathways Commission work and what that research represented, there's other issues in the economy with respect to getting people into new careers, getting people that are out of university, those folks into the careers that we have opportunities for. So it goes well beyond just that Pathways work, but that is one place where we're seeing momentum, and hopefully we can make an impact.
You're a numbers guy. You like to look at the data, but we also want to help our listeners understand a little bit more. So the unemployment rate now, 5.1%, one of the highest in the country. So job openings remain elevated. What's happening kind of beneath the surface?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the more concerning and somewhat odd trends, honestly, that we're seeing such a large uptick in unemployment. It's been, over a percentage point increase over the last year. We were one of the lower in the country a year ago, and now we're one of the highest in the country and above the national trend. What might be happening there is you might have people that maybe previously had started businesses during COVID who are closing those businesses down, for example, getting back into the labor force, they've been in the labor force, but getting back into the job market, whereas previously they were self-employed. You have college students that are entering the labor market for the first time. potentially taking on, that job search and maybe that's taking slightly longer than it had in the past. So there's a lot of potential explanations that we're not entirely sure of yet, but it's definitely a concerning trend that it's been so fast in Connecticut over the last year.
What type of people aren't captured in that number, that unemployment rate?
That's people that aren't looking for work, and that could be a number of things. People often are wondering, well, these numbers don't capture people who are discouraged, but that would be, unemployment doesn't capture people that are discouraged, but that's where you see it in the labor force, right? We've seen the labor force decline. That could be discouraged workers. So unemployment is just the people that are actively looking for work and haven't found it yet. And so, yeah, again, that could be, there are a number of reasons why people are unemployed. There's different layers of that, how long you've been unemployed, what type of unemployment you're on, or, whether that's because you laid off or you quit or you're entering, you're had a family and you're entering the labor force again, a few years on. So there's a bunch of possible explanations, but again, it's really the trend that's the concerning piece there.
And, we see these trends, we see that big number of job openings, that unemployment percentage kicking up, but Connecticut's economy is still kicking, making headlines even in terms of GDP. It grew 1.8% in the first quarter of this year. How can both of these things be true?
Yeah, I think what we see, especially for the early part of this year, we saw a lot of that growth dominated in places like manufacturing. We saw it in places like professional business services and in finance. And so some of these higher income areas, we've seen an increase in GDP and what we're producing in the state. That could be because those particular industries perhaps are investing heavily in capital goods and equipment, right? So they're trying to get more out of the labor that they have, and they've been successful in doing that. That's one way that you might be able to see it. In manufacturing's case, though, we have seen a recovery of some of the employment in that space. And that could be because we're just recovering faster from the tariff impacts that we saw over the last year. So some of it might be timing. Others of it might be the fact that employers are forced to be investing a lot more in their facilities as opposed to, their labor, because there's not that labor available to them.
Yeah. And so when we talk about like automation, it's really kind of helping upskill those workers and then in the end being a little bit more efficient.
Absolutely. I think automation historically often happens because of the constraints that are on employers as opposed to, just the desire to automate. Automation is usually one of the more last resorts. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of all sorts of different and expertise in order to do it. People would rather hire folks. If we're automating a lot, it's partly because they don't have the people or it's too hard to hire those people. And that's one of the concerns there. If we continue to see that unemployment, what are we not doing to get more people into those jobs that we currently have?
What kind of things do you think that Connecticut needs to do to kind of keep that GDP number climbing?
I think continuing to encourage opportunity for investment, right? So investment is important here. And I think the other piece is there are folks on this island. We have a 5.1% unemployment rate. That's, there are people that are available. So part of it is continuing to get those people into those jobs. And then the final piece is trying to reverse the trend of the labor force that we've seen over the last year. GDP is also a function of what we get out of labor and what labor actually produces. If people are leaving the labor force, that's less of an opportunity to grow. And so that's coming down to improving costs in the state, making it more affordable, making it more efficient for businesses to operate in the state. There's a lot of levers that we can pull in order to make it better, but it's all about growing each one of those aspects.
So I'm going to stop you there for a second on that affordability note. Can you kind of dig a little bit deeper? Why is that such an important word kind of across?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we look at, there's two places where we see it. It's both in the business location decisions, so where businesses are deciding to do business, but also, and arguably more important in the current context, where workers and where labor wants to live and work. And affordability impacts both those decisions. When you think about it, whether it's childcare and getting people back into the labor force when they have children and when they're making their family decisions, having it be affordable makes that an easier decision for them. When you have expensive housing, that makes it harder for people to live here, makes it harder for people to live near to where they want to work or where the opportunity is. And that ultimately drives people out of the state. We see out-migration to other states. That's not every state. Many states see in-migration. Connecticut is, and the Northeast broadly, sees people move to other parts of the country. And when we look at the research, it's primarily as a result of cost. And so when we're trying to improve the economy, a lot of that is about making it easier to live here. And a lot of that has to do with making it more affordable to live here.
But how far can you go, right? There's only so much that can be done.
I think that it's definitely a long-term piece of this, right? Like the problems that we have with respect to affordability were not created overnight. And so I think to that end, what can you do in the near term? There are only certain things that you can do in the near term, but we should be thinking long-term. I think that's the purpose of the foundation, is to be thinking about what is the long-term competitiveness of the state. And so thinking about building more housing, thinking about providing more access to affordable childcare and building the infrastructure for that, thinking about how we can change policy to encourage more healthcare options for folks in the state. Those are all pieces that have long-term dividends that, we might not see that in year 1, year 2, year 3, but in the long run, that's better off. And if people have been thinking about those things in the past, we wouldn't be having these problems right now, right? So that's, I think, more of the piece that I'm concerned about and focused on.
Well, Dustin, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more about the foundation's work and continuing to watch to see what happens to Connecticut's economy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's a wrap on this week's BizCast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. In the meantime, give us your feedback and let us know if there are any guests you'd like to hear from by emailing us at bizcast@cbia.com. Remember, you can listen, like, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For a full list of episodes, head to cbia.com.